Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this first European Polar Board and APECS webinar, where today we will be listening to Yves Frenot from the French Polar Institute, who will be talking about the Antarctic Treaty and the protection of the environment. And before I just pass over to Yves, if anybody has any questions they want to ask Yves after his presentation, you can either type them into the there's a question box on your control panel, or you can click a button next to your name to raise your hand, and I will be able to then unmute you so you can ask your question. And yes, but we'll save the questions until afterwards. By the way, I am Joseph Nolan. I'm from the European Polar Board Secretariat in The Hague. And without further ado, I'll pass over to Yves.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe, and good afternoon, everybody. First of all, before starting the presentation, I would like to thank very warmly the European Polar Board and APECS for the invitation to give this talk today. Well, I hope it will be useful for everybody. Probably some of you are already aware of the Antarctic Treaty and the protection of the environment, but part of my presentation will be very, very basic. And to be very basic, I start with the next slide. If I have no problem with techniques, it seems that it's not working. And Joe, I think I need some help from you.
Can you enter back into your PowerPoint? If you click the PowerPoint tab at the bottom there, I think you've come out of PowerPoint slightly.
Okay.
There you go. Click there. There you go.
Try to start again. Okay, that works. Fantastic. So, very basic, I said. As you can see on this slide, we have huge differences between the Arctic and the Antarctic. And the Arctic is an ocean, of course, and Antarctica is a continent. And viewed from the space, this continent is white, so we have a similar aspects from the space between north and south. But of course, if you imagine that all the ice over Antarctica is melting, you can see a huge continent, 14 million square kilometers in area. This continent has some specificities, and one of the most important is its remoteness. Antarctica is isolated from the rest of the world by this Southern Ocean, and also it is a very isolated continent, and its discovery was in fact very late. You can see here a picture showing the discovering of Terre d'Illy, the French sector of Antarctica, by Dumont d'Urville in 1840. So it was yesterday, in fact. So very, very short time. An important point also to keep in mind is that this continent was exploited, was used for some living resources at the very beginning, just after its discovery. And we had some hunting of elephant seals, fur seals, whale, and so on. And most of these activities stopped by the 1930s when other fuel resources arrived everywhere. Regarding the mineral resources, in fact, we don't know exactly what are the resources in Antarctica. And the main reason is because the whole continent is covered by the very thick layer of ice, more than 2,000 meters thickness in average over the continent. So we know only what could be the resources, the mineral resources on the coast. When we compare the mineral resources which occur on the continent, in the different continents which were in contact with Antarctica long time ago, before the continental drift. Now, in terms of governance, you can see on this map that there are 7 claimant countries in Antarctica. And these territories are shown in brown, are drawn in a sector from South Pole to the border. Sorry, to the coast. And you can see, for example, here a sector claimed by New Zealand, a sector in red claimed by Australia, and in yellow here by France. Here in green, a sector claimed by Norway. Here, a sector claimed by UK, by Argentina, and by Chile. So here you can see some overlap between the claimant territories, the claimed territories. So we have here some trouble. We had in the past some trouble in this region due to this overlap of claimant parties. What happened in 1957-58 was it was international geophysics years, and during this year, several states, you can see on the slide, more than 60 states, and a huge number of scientific organizations and scientists worked together in Antarctica. And it was a very important period for the story of Antarctica, because this collaborative work created the best condition to make Antarctica a continent dedicated to science. You should remember that at this time we were really in the middle of the Cold War between the two blocks, East and West bloc, and this IGY, International Geophysics Year, was really an opportunity to work together, all the scientists from all the countries, without any bad thing in mind or speculative aspect or geopolitical issues. So, following this IGY, several countries, total of yes.
Yves, apologies. Could you just move your the GoToWebinar control panel? It's blocking some of your slides slightly.
Okay, so
there we go. Perfect.
I did nothing, in fact. So, but if it's okay now, it's perfect. Okay, I continue. So in 1959, 1 year after the IGY, 12 countries decided to sign the Antarctic Treaty. Among these 12 countries, there were the 7 claimant parties: Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, New Zealand, Norway, United Kingdom, and other countries like Belgium, Japan, the Soviet Union at this time, South Africa, and the United States of America. Just remember, if I just come back to the previous, I try to do that. No. So Joe, there is a problem. If we cannot have the screen and the panel, so now I have no control of my PowerPoint again. I try.
If you click on the screen, it should go back to it. There we go. Perfect. I think.
Yes, but oh yeah, okay, it's fine. Okay, so I would like to come back to this map just to emphasize the fact that we have in this sector no claimant parties at all. So it's the first point. And the second point, I come back now to this slide, is that two very important countries which are very active in Antarctica today. They are all very active, but the Soviet Union, and now the Russian Federation, and the US are not claimant parties in Antarctica. So it's an important point to keep in mind. So this Antarctic Treaty entered in force in 1961, and today, in 2017, we have 53 parties and 29 consultative parties. So what are consultative parties? Consultative parties are these countries which have demonstrated to be very active and scientifically active in Antarctica. So we have a long discussion at the moment in the Antarctic Treaty to know exactly what is a scientifically active countries in Antarctica. The treaty itself gave an example, for example, to manage or to operate a scientific station in Antarctica. But it's clearly only an example. So it is not necessary to have a station and to operate a station in Antarctica to be part of the consultative parties. And what is important also to know is that consultative parties can vote in the meeting of the Antarctic Treaty. So only 29 parties have the right of vote at the moment in Antarctica. What the Antarctic Treaty says. The first point, very important point, concerns the territorial claims and the status quo of territorial claims. What does it mean? It means that nobody can contest to the claimant party that they claim a part of Antarctica. But on the reverse, these parties are not allowed to exhibit or to show that they are claimant parties in regard to the other actors in Antarctica. And also, during all the duration of the treaty, there will be no new claims or enlargement of an existing claim. So it's really like all these claims are frozen during the life of the treaty. So it's a very important point. The second point is that this continent is dedicated to peace. So it means that, as you can see on this slide, that any measure of a military nature, such as the establishment of military bases and fortification, carrying out of military maneuvers, as well as testing of any type of weapons, are prohibited. And the second point concerns nuclear explosions, which are totally forbidden, prohibited, and also the disposal of radioactive waste material in Antarctica. The second point, it's usual to say that the Antarctic Treaty make the Antarctic continent dedicated to peace and science. And in fact, the Antarctic Treaty opened the possibility to all the signatories of the treaty to conduct scientific activities on the continent and to establish, for example, scientific stations everywhere on the continent. I give you an example. France and Italy has built some years ago a joint station, Concordia, inland the continent. And this station was built on a sector claimed by Australia. But due to the Antarctic Treaty, it was not necessary to ask the permission to Australia to build a station in this sector, as soon as we have demonstrated that this station was built for scientific activities only. The Antarctic Treaty encouraged also scientific cooperation between the parties or the countries working in Antarctica, encourage information exchanges, personal exchanges, and also exchange of scientific results observation. Following the Antarctic Treaty signature, several other instruments were set up. The first of them was the Conservation of Antarctic Seal, signed in London in 1972. Then the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resource, CAMLR, signed in Canberra in 1980. After that, we had another convention called the Wellington Convention, signed in 1988. And this convention was related to the regulation of Antarctic mineral resources activities. But as I show you on this slide, this convention was never ratified. The reason why was that several countries, including Australia, France, Spain, consider that this convention on the use of natural resources, mineral resources in Antarctica are not in the spirit, following the spirit of the Antarctic Treaty. So these three countries and then other countries refused to ratify this convention, and it's the reason why this convention was never entered in force. In replacement, these countries said, okay, we have this convention of Antarctic mineral resources activities, but we would prefer to put in place a special tool to protect the environment in Antarctica. And it was the origin of the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, which is also usually called the Madrid Protocol, because it was signed in Madrid in 1991. So an important point also to keep in mind is that the area of the Antarctic Treaty, and you can see the boundary of the Antarctic Treaty area on this slide. It's the red cycle that you have, sorry, I'll come back, that you have here. So all the areas south of the 60 degrees latitude south belong to the Antarctic Treaty area. It means that the Antarctic Treaty area concerns the continent itself, but also the ice shelf and also the ocean and islands which are in this circle. Regarding the CAMLR, the area of the CAMLR conventions, it's a bit larger, and this boundary is close to the polar front, and because this boundary has a more ecological significance for the oceanographic ecosystems. Now, what is the Madrid Protocol? The Madrid Protocol designates Antarctica as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. So the protocol uses the same wording that the Antarctic Treaty, but adds the concept of natural reserve. What is important to say is that there is no end for the protocol, as for the Antarctic Treaty. So nothing in the text of the treaty or the protocol said that the treaty or the protocol will end by blah blah blah. So I come back on that just a few minutes. So the Madrid Protocol was signed in 1991 and entered in force in 1998. What is important to keep also in mind is that the protocol considers the scientific activities, the science in Antarctica, as a value to be protected at the same level as the environment. So it means that the protection of environment by the protocol is not only to preserve this environment, but also to preserve the scientific activity, the scientific knowledge that can be obtained by this very special environment. One of the most famous articles of the protocol is Article 7 regarding the prohibition of mineral resource activities. So this article is very short. It is written entirely on the slide. Any activity relating to mineral resources other than for scientific research shall be prohibited. So it means it's very clear today it's absolutely not possible to exploit mineral resources, oil, gas, or other mineral resources in Antarctica south of the 60 degrees of latitude south. But it's something which is not very well understood, and especially in the media. So it can be very confusing in the media. And some of these media say that, after 2048, it will be the end of the protocol, and it will be a rush for the exploitation of the mineral resources. So it's not true at all. And I try to explain with this slide why. What the protocol said in its Article 25 is first that, in fact, the protocol may be modified or amended at any time. But for that, we need the agreement of all the consultative parties. So it means that today, we need the agreement of 29 countries, which are consultative parties, to modify the protocol. So it's no other possibility. The Article 25 says then that after 50 years after the enter in force of the protocol, so it means in 2048, if one country wants to put on the table the question of discussion about the protocol, its contents, and so on, it's possible, but not before. And if one country asks for that, so a conference shall be established to start the discussion. It doesn't mean that the conclusion of this discussion will be a modification of the protocol. Third, if a modification or an amendment of the protocol is wished by a majority of the consultative parties, including the 3/4 of the consultative parties in 1991. At this time, there were 26 consultative parties. So we need this proportion of agreement to make the modification or amendment possible. So it means that we need at a minimum of 20 countries to agree on this modification. But it's not finished. To enter in force, this modification or amendment must be ratified by 3/4 of the consultative parties. So again, 29 consultative parties in 2017, today, but including ratification by all the consultative parties in 1991. So the 26 consultative parties when the protocol was signed. So it means that it would be really very, very difficult to modify the protocol even in 2048. And the last point is that this modification cannot concern the prohibition on Antarctic mineral resource activities unless there is in force a binding legal regime on Antarctic mineral resource activities that includes an agreed means for determining whether, and if so, under which conditions, any such activities would be acceptable. So as a conclusion of this slide, sorry to have been a bit long about that, but I think it's very important to clearly understand the solidity of the protocol and the Antarctic Treaty also. So the colleagues, the lawyers who wrote the protocol in 1991 made a text very robust, and it would be really very difficult to change the protocol even in 2048. So it means 50 years after it's entered in force. The Madrid Protocol is completed by 6 annexes. You have here the list, but I shall just illustrate very quickly all these annexes. The first annex concerns the initial environmental impact assessment. All the activities in Antarctica need to have an environmental impact assessment. And we have some magic wording in the language of the protocol and the treaty is to determine if an activity has an impact less than minor or transitory. So if the environmental impact assessment demonstrates that one activity has an impact less than minor or transitory, so we can proceed very easily. We have just to declare the activity to a national competent authority. Each country, each party of the Antarctic Treaty and the Madrid Protocol has a national competent authority, which is allowed to collect all these declarations and also to deliver authorization. And authorization needs to be delivered if the initial environmental evaluation demonstrates that, yes, there is an impact minor or transitory, but well balanced between the interest for the science, for example, and the protection of the environment. So in such a case, the national competent authority delivers an authorization. But if the initial environmental evaluation demonstrates that the impact will be certainly more than minor or transitory, so we need to follow a new procedure and to draft what is called a comprehensive environmental evaluation, a CEE, which is made publicly available and which will be discussed by the CEP, the Committee for Environmental Protection, and the RTCM. So I explain what is a CEP in a few minutes. And at the end of this procedure, again, the national competent authority can deliver or not an authorization for this activity. Some example of this level. For most of the scientific activities or for tourist activities, for example, we need to have an initial environmental evaluation. So it remains at the level, at the national level. But if we want to build a new station in Antarctica or to drill deep ice core drilling using some fluids which have a negative impact on the environment, we need to follow a comprehensive environmental evaluation process. Annex 2 is related to the conservation of flora and fauna. So it's the basic principle says that taking harmful interference shall be prohibited, except in accordance with a permit. So it's true, all the scientific research on vertebrates, for example, needs to have such a permit. And another consequence is that no species or animal or plant not native to the Antarctic Treaty area can be introduced in the region except in accordance with the permits. So I show you some old photographies of previous expedition using ponies or using dogs. These photographies would be totally impossible today because introduction of dogs, for example, are today impossible due to the Annex 2 of the Madrid Protocol. Annex 3 is related to the waste disposal and management. The rule is very simple also. All wastes must be removed from Antarctica. So we have some possibilities of treatment locally, but with some conditions. So I do not enter into the detail, but the basic rule is no waste, no human waste in Antarctica. Annex 4 is related to the prevention of marine pollution. Annex 5 is related to protected areas, managed areas, historic sites, and monuments. So we have in Antarctica, as shown on this map, several sites or specific areas which receive a special status of protected areas, managed areas, or historic sites and monuments. Just to make an illustration, we have in the Terradeli, near the French stations, Dumont-d'Urville, one of these Antarctic specially protected area, ASPA number 120, called Archipel de Pointe Géologique. All these ASPA have a management plan which describes very precisely the limits, the borders of the ASPA, what is possible to do inside, what kind of activities can be performed or not, how we can access to the ASPA. And another point, important point to know is that to enter into an ASPA, you need a permit, a specific permit provided by a national competent authority. And this permit describes the condition of access. For example, in the case of the ASPA 120 in Dumont-d'Urville, there is a rule, very strict rule, which says that it's not allowed to go close to emperor penguins, closer than 40 meters, except for the scientists who have specific permits for that, working on this bird. But sometimes it's difficult to apply the management plan, especially as you can see here. In 2014, it's not the staff of the station who came close to the penguin, but it's the reverse. The penguins came on the station. So obviously it was not possible to work at all. And you can see some building. This building, for example, is for safety in the station. We have the food here stored, and this food is available in case of burning, for example, of the station, of the normal storage. But you can see that due to the presence of the emperor penguin here, during several weeks, it was not possible to reach this storage and without to be not in accordance with the management plan of this ASPA. So it's just a joke about sometimes the difficulty to apply the management plan of these protected areas. And the last annex of the protocol of the Madrid Protocol is Annex 6 on the liability. And this annex was signed in Stockholm in 2005, but has never been entered in force until now. Some consultative parties are still to sign the text and ratify the text to allow its enter in force. Well, now a few words about the Committee for Environmental Protection. So it's a special committee, and its function is to provide advice and formulate recommendations to the parties in connection with the implementation of the protocol and for consideration of the ATCS. So some example of the advices produced by the CEP, means of minimizing or mitigating environmental impact of the activities in the Antarctic Treaty area. Also advices on the elaboration of Antarctic Protected Area System, collection, archiving, exchange, and evaluation of information related to the environmental protection. Advices also on the current state of the Antarctic environment and its future, if it can be modeled, and also the need for scientific research, including environmental monitoring related to the implementation of this protocol. The CEP counts today 39 parties. You have the list on the screen. And there are also 3 observers which are permanently invited to the meeting. It's a SCAR, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, a CAMLA, and the COMNAP. COMNAP is the Council of Managers of National Antarctic Programs. And we have also several experts, which are usually non-governmental bodies. You have the list here. I draw your attention on IATO, especially IATO is an organization of Antarctic tour operator, and it's a very active organization in the CEP and in the treaty, because as I show you in a few minutes, tourism is an increasing activity in Antarctica. Now we have several priorities in the discussion under the CEP, and the main priorities are these ones. First of all, understanding and responding to the environmental consequences of climate change in the Antarctic region. The second is related to biodiversity, and especially on the impact of non-native species, including the transfer of native species between bioregions within Antarctica. A third priority is related to the impact of tourism and non-governmental activities. And finally, we work also to improve the effectiveness of protected area management and further developing the Antarctic Protected Area System. Few examples about that. In terms of paleoclimatology, for example, just remind you a program conducted in the 20. It stopped. The program finished in the 24. It was a deep ice drilling project called EPICA, a European project, which allowed to reconstruct more than 800,000 years of past climate in Antarctica. And at the moment, there is another project also conducted by Europe, which will try to reconstruct more than 1 million years of past climate. And we are very enthusiastic for this project because most of the discussion in the IPCC, for example, was based on the data provided by EPICA ice cores. So we are confident that with the future work in glaciology in Antarctica, we can improve our knowledge of the past climate and perhaps to better understand what will be the future climate of our planet in the next decades. The second point I said was related to non-native species. We have already some example of the introduction of non-native species in Antarctica. On the left part of the slide, you have the example of a plant introduced on Deception Island, and this plant was removed in 2010. And in the marine ecosystem, we have also an example of the introduction of these crabs, the Asaranis, which is a bipolar species, and which was found close to the Antarctic Peninsula in 2024. What is important also to understand is that we have several vectors of propagults of non-native species from all the continents to Antarctica, through the cargoes, through the food imported for the station, for the passengers of aircraft or ships, and we have some example also of the organisms on the hoods of the vessel. So different way to import non-native species in Antarctica. Another point, another subject issue discussed in the CEP and the GISM is tourism. And you can see that at the moment we have had to 40,000 tourists visiting Antarctica, mainly between November and March, and principally in the Antarctic Peninsula. The curve you have here illustrates the development of touristic activities in Antarctica from 1990 to 2013. And you can see that globally we have a huge increase of this activity. And despite a small decrease at the end of the period here, the trend is now increasing. And you can see on this table the reading from the right to the left, the different type of tourism, the number of tourists depending on the type of activity, and the increase. And it is expected that in the next summer season, we will have more than 46,000 tourists in Antarctica. Just for comparison, in summer, among the 80 scientific stations, we have about 7,000 people, scientists and logisticians in summer. And in winter, we have 40 permanent stations in Antarctica, and with less than 1,000 staff in winter. So a huge difference between the number of scientists and logisticians and tourists. And another characteristic of this touristic activity is its diversification during the last year. All these slides, this photo illustrates the diversification of activities from kayaking and to make photo, trekking, camp, and so on and so on. So all this increase in the activity touristic activity in Antarctica, and this diversification has some consequences, and especially in terms of safety for people. And here we have a very famous example of an accident of a ship in 27 Explorer, which had a great problem. All the crew and passenger were safely evacuated, but it's the demonstration that an increase in the traffic in the regions will be also will imply also an increase in the risk for humans in the region. Just this whole photo showing the collect of penguin eggs in South Africa at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. It's just to say that the mentalities, how we consider the protection of the environment has greatly changed during all the previous years. And now, of course, this collect of eggs would be totally impossible. And it's true at land, but it's true also at sea. And at the moment, we have a meeting in Hobart of the CAMLA discussing the marine protected areas in Antarctica. Last year, so at the moment, we have two marine protected areas in Antarctica. The first MPA was this small area in orange in the South Islands. It's a small area, but it was very important because it launched a process to expand the MPA in Antarctica. Last year, we have this very important area in the Ross Sea region, which were adopted by the CAMLA. And now this year, discussions are mainly focusing on this green proposed areas in East Antarctica. So we don't know if the discussion will be successful this year, but at least many scientists in these regions are working to provide all the scientific data to demonstrate the importance and the interest to protect these areas. Well, I'm very close to the end of my presentation. A few images on the biodiversity of this region, marine biodiversity, but also terrestrial biodiversity. And just to say that this continent is really unique. Its governance is also unique and is relatively well working. So it's a positive message for all of us for the future of this region. Even if we have the climate change, we have some very strong pressure in the Arctic about the exploitation of the mineral resources and so on. At least I hope that the tool available in Antarctica to protect this environment are sufficiently robust to effectively protect this unique environment in the future, not only now, but also in the future. Thank you very much to all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yves. That was an excellent and thorough overview of the Antarctic Treaty and the CEP and the Madrid Protocol. We have some time now for a few questions, if anybody has any. So either if you can click the button to raise your hand and then you can ask your question, I can unmute you and you can ask a question, or if you type them into the question box, There's already a few questions here, so I'll start with those, if Yves is ready to answer them. First one here is, how is the overlapping claims by different countries? How is that? How did that come about? And were the different claims, were they claimed at the same time? That's a question from Renato.
I would say that yes, the Antarctic Treaty recognized that the three countries, Chile, Argentina, and United Kingdom, claim for similar or overlapping sectors. But having said that, the Antarctic Treaty asks to this country to not manifest or use this claim, and as I said during my talk, to freeze this claim during the life of the treaty. It means that there is no real problem, and the Antarctic Treaty was a good tool to avoid the discussion for the moment. Discussion will start again, perhaps, if the treaty ends in several years or decades. But as I said, it's very unlikely. So it's a very good way to manage difficult geopolitical situation. What is important also to say is that for the claimant parties, for France, for example, the French law is applied in Antarctica for the French citizen. But in the Motherville, in Terradili, in this sector claimed by France, the French law cannot be applied to any other non-French citizen. So it's also a way to, it may be seen as an advantage, but it's also a weakness, because sometimes we have no legal tool to make a strong regulation of the activities in Antarctica. So it's one of the issues which is worked by the Antarctic Treaty and the CEP at the moment.
Okay. Our next question, also from the question box, is from Liesel. I hope, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, I probably am. Although countries don't have to ask permission to build a base in another country's claim territory, are other countries allowed to use the bases of other countries for scientific research?
Yes, it's the spirit of Article 3 of the treaty, for exchange of personnel, exchange of data, and so on and so on. So it is clear that most of the stations, most of the National Antarctic Program work in collaboration with other countries. For example, in France, the French Polar Institute support more than 40 projects in Antarctica each year, and no project at all are only French. They have always at least one other country involved in the science. It's true also that we have guests in our station invited by the French scientists to participate in the activities. So it's an international guest, of course. So it is the main point. This question conduct to another reflection to me. It's I said that we have 80 summer stations, and among these 80, 40 are permanent, are open during winter. It is clear that at the moment there is a real wish by the countries in the Antarctic Treaty and the Madrid Protocol in the CEP to see this number be stable and to have no more station in Antarctica. And the spirit would be to encourage the sharing of station in Antarctica. We have very few examples. I spoke about Concordia Station, which is shared by Italy and France, but there are few other examples like that. And it's clear that if we want really to protect the environment, we have to minimize our impact, our human impact, and minimize the impact of the stations and the activity of the National Antarctic Program. CONNAP is working very hard on that, on making some recommendation how to minimize the impact on our environment and how to work together, sharing infrastructure, sharing ship, aircraft, and so on. So it's really in the spirit of the Antarctic Treaty, but from a very pragmatic point of view, it's the best way to minimize our impact on the environment.
Okay, I think that definitely answers the question. The next one, I think is a very good question from Sebastian, and they ask, does the treaty embrace hydrothermal or thermal vents for energy utilization in Antarctic bases in order to avoid fossil fuel energy? I suppose this is asking partly, does geothermal energy count as a mineral resource in a way?
I'm not sure to have clearly understood the question. Is it related to the renewable energy, the use of renewable energy in Antarctica? Is it correct?
Yes. So does the treaty allow for the use of hydrothermal energy in Antarctica? Or geothermal energy?
Yeah. No, the treaty said nothing about the kind of energy to be used, but we have a lot of discussion about that in the CEP. And of course, the CEP encourage the use of renewable energy. At the moment, we have mainly wind energy and the solar panel energy. I am not aware that other kind of renewable energy are used in Antarctica. But yes, the problem is we have some technological issues, and my hope is that in the near future all these issues will be solved. But I'll give you just an example. In Concordia Station, we wished some years ago to build a wind generator, and we asked to several companies if they can provide such a wind generator or to provide a prototype or something like that and work on this issue with us. And just to keep in mind that Concordia is at more than at a very high altitude and on more than 2,300 meters of ice. There is no rock to anchor a wind generator. So and the temperature are very low, minus 30 degrees in summer, minus 80 degrees in winter. So I imagine that low temperature was a limitation. In fact, no. And it was answered to us that it's not a problem because we can use a part of the energy produced to warm the system. So it's not a problem. But the problem is that we don't know how to anchor a high wind generator on the ice. It's the main problem, and it's the reason why we have not made any progress on the establishment of a wind generator in Concordia at the moment. So we change our plan, and we are working with a solar panel, and we intend to set up a kind of solar farm around Concordia to produce energy during summer. During summer only, of course, because we have more than 4 months of night, continuous night, and in the reverse, 4 months with a continuous day light.
Okay, the next two questions, both from Renato and Pablo, refer to krill fisheries and the marine protected areas. How much do krill fishery business owners participate in the decisions for setting up marine protected areas, and to what extent are these fisheries allowed in these protected areas?
Okay, so it will be very difficult for me to answer to this question for the reason. The reason is that the krill activity, the krill and fisheries activities are not discussed in the CEP, which is the body that I know very well, and I participate in the meeting of the CEP. But it's discussed in the CAMLAR. And I am not involved personally in the CAMLAR, so I don't know very well these questions, these issues. But for sure, I think that it's a very important issue for the marine ecosystems, because krill is the base of the food web and has a very strong impact on the predators like penguin, for example. So it's one of the key issue discussed by the CAMLAR at the moment, but I don't know how the companies, the fishing companies and so on are involved or not in the discussion. I am sorry, I have not the answer to this question.
Okay, so you'll have to ask somebody who knows a bit more about CAMLAR to give you a more thorough answer there. Okay, next question. We have a similar question from Astrid and from Gilda, asking, are there plans to restrict tourism in the future in the light of the increasing rate of tourism in Antarctica? Are there plans to revisit the current regulations, and how are these applied to non-signatory countries to the treaty? How is tourism controlled if a country with tourism is not a signatory?
Okay, I would say that first of all, probably 80% of the tourist activities is conducted by tour operators, which are members of IATO, the International Association for Antarctic Tour Operator. And IATO has a very strict regulation and asks to his members to follow very strictly this regulation. So it's the first point. I would say that the impact of this kind of tourism is very well evaluated by IATO, and it's also its interest to protect the environment, because it's one of the reasons why so many people want to visit Antarctica. It's because it's a pristine environment, and they don't want to visit a region with which is badly depreciated by activities. So it's the first point. The second point is that most of the tour operators or comes from countries which are members of the treaty and the Madrid Protocol. The second point. We can have some troubles when the flag of the vessels are from countries which are not members of the treaty. So it's another weakness of the system. But usually, it's not these countries which organize the trip in Antarctica, but the vessels are chartered by tour operators belonging to countries, members or signatories of Antarctic Treaty. So it's through this way that we can really work, and not through the country or the flag of the ship. And finally, I would say that the main concern is from a small group of individuals visiting Antarctica. When I say small group, I would say either individuals making an expedition in Antarctica for skiing, for example, or climbing mountains and so on. All these individuals, a small group, are very difficult to manage and to check that everything has been done clearly with a permit asked to national competent authority and so on and so on. So it's obviously here that we have the main concern, and not with the huge expeditions which are very well controlled at the very beginning of the process.
Okay, good. Another question now from Swati. Hello. Can plants or animals be taken from Antarctica for research purposes if they cannot be introduced into Antarctica, but can they be removed?
Yes, it's possible. Annex 2 explicitly says that we can take animals from Antarctica for scientific research only, and with a permit only. So scientists will want to have some animals in its laboratory for breeding or for other purposes, must apply for that, make an impact assessment, and the national competent authority will deliver or not a permit for such exportation.
Okay, good. We've got two more questions, and then I'm conscious of the fact we've kind of run over time a little bit, so if we'll just do these last two and we'll wrap up. This next one is from Anik. Hello, Anik. She asks, could Yves please explain how the protected area systems are planned? Is it just a question of chance and proximity to some stations, or is there more of a system to how the protected areas are organized?
Okay, again, I'm not a specialist of the marine areas, and the discussion of that on that are conducted through the camera, but I can answer or provide a part of the answer. The justification of the marine protected area is really based on scientific knowledge and the specificity of the ecosystem, the marine ecosystem, either the benthos, so all the organisms fixed at the bottom of the sea, but also all the other components of the ecosystem. Probably you read a few days ago some articles in the media about the unsuccess breeding and success of emperor penguin and Adelie penguins in the Dumont d'Urville last year due to the sea ice conditions. There was a press release of WWF about that a few days ago. And this information was released by this non-governmental organization because it was at the same time that the discussion in the Kamla about the MPA. Unfortunately, the press release was good, but the media did not understood very well the issue and related the fact that the Adelie penguins died due to the sea ice condition to the necessity to have marine protected area. Unfortunately, the sea ice conditions in front of the Dumont is due to probably climate change, but also changes in the circulation of ice around Antarctica, the amount of ice, the drifting, and so on and so on. But the problem will be not solved by the creation of MPA. So we must be very careful about that. We have several issues to manage to protect the marine ecosystem as a whole, and especially in the sector where the biodiversity is very important, rich, and where we have some production of krill, for example, at the base of the food web, as I said previously, and to manage other situations which are probably more difficult to manage because it's related to the impact of the whole climate change, of the global climate change, and its impact on Antarctica and Antarctic ecosystems.
Anique has just added a note to her question, and I'm not surprised at this. She wasn't asking about the marine protected areas. She wants to know more about the terrestrial protected areas and how are they more closely linked to proximity to stations, or is it more by chance?
No. Concerning the terrestrial protected area, the point is that they are often close to the station, but it's not. It's a correlation. It's not a relation between the two. In fact, to list an area as a specially protected area, we need to demonstrate that there are some value to protect in this region. And obviously, the regions, the area which are well known, or the best known, are around the scientific station. So it's the reason why the ASPAs are often not very far from the station. The second point is also that an ASPA implies normally to conduct monitoring of this value. So it means that to come back regularly in this area and to follow the trends and the biodiversity and to see if the protection, the special protection of the area has some effect on these values. So if you have an ASPA lost in the middle of nowhere, there are very few chances, first, that you have enough arguments to classify this region as an ASPA, and you have very few chances to have the possibility to visit regularly this region for monitoring. So it's the reason, I think, why most of the ASPA are not very far from the scientific station today.
I hope that answers your question, Anique. I know you want to know about the microbes. We have one person with their hand up to ask their question over the audio, Ruchi Singh. So if I unmute you now, you should be able to ask your question. There, you should be unmuted. Hello. Hello, Ruchi, you there? Hello, do you have a question? Okay, sorry, we can't hear you, unfortunately. So I'm going to move on to the final question on the question box. And Ruchi, if you can type your question into the box, maybe that would be an easier way. So the final question, another one from Liesl. What are the rules or regulations in place with regard to the use of biodegradable products at different bases? Does this count as
about
waste?
the rule about the waste, the question?
Yes, so the question is about using biodegradable products and how does this relate to the removal of waste in Antarctica?
Okay. Annex 3 of the Madrid Protocol provides some information about that. And what I say during my presentation is that the basic rule is all the waste must be removed from Antarctica. Regarding some biodegradable waste, especially human waste, for example, it is possible under some condition to put this waste at sea, for example, for the coastal station, and we need to have some currents and drifts which disperse quickly the waste at sea. It depends also on the number of staff at the station. So we have some indication like that. Regarding other waste, like papers, for example, it is allowed to burn this waste, but we need to have some system with filters in order to minimize the emission in the atmosphere, toxic emission in the atmosphere. And for the rest, I think that most of the other waste must be removed. We in Concordia station, for example, we work with the European Space Agency to set up a system of grey water treatment. So this system allows to recycle 80% of the water of the station. So it's a very good proportion. And then the mulch produced by the system goes to a black water treatment system. And at the end, we have some solid waste, which in theory should be removed to the coast and then removed from Antarctica. I say in theory because we have a very strong problem. Again, it's just a technological problem, so it could be solved, but the merge, the product of the black water treatment system is frozen in Concordia because temperature is low. But when we transport all this product to the coast by traverse, when we arrive close to the sea, the temperature becomes positive, and it becomes very difficult to manage this waste. So we are working about that also, but again, we are facing some technical problems to improve the management of waste in Antarctica from a general point of view.
And are there any regulations regarding which specific products can be used in Antarctica? Specifically thinking about cleaning products in stations, and do they have to be of a environmentally friendly or biodegradable variety?
To my knowledge, there is no specific regulation for that. When I give the example of the water treatment in Concordia, it's possible then to fill a pit in the ice with a clean water. The Annex 3 of the Antarctic Treaty allows to put the waste, such a waste, in pits in the ice, in the station inland, not at the interior of the continent. But obviously, it's an example of the text was written in 1991 when we had no technology to clean these products. So now the technology is evolving, and we have no new system for the treatment of this water, and probably all this technology will be improved in the near future. So it will be easier and easier to clean the waste inside the Antarctic before removing in the near future, for sure.
Okay, brilliant. So Ruchi has written her question here about is it possible to install waste treatment plants in Antarctica? And I suppose you've kind of already answered that, Yves, particularly with regard to wastewater anyway. Yeah, so is there options to install waste treatment plants in Antarctica?
Yes, it's it's an option, but it's very expensive, and it's also again we have several technical issues, but we have several examples. Our partner, the Italian Antarctic program, for example, has set up such a station, a waste station treatment in Mario Zucchelli Station, the summer station in Terranova Bay, and it works. But it's a huge work which requires people, technicians, and also usually a lot of energy. And again, we come back to a previous question about the production of energy in Antarctica. At the moment, most of the energy is produced by fossil fuel with the emission of CO2 and so on and so on. So we have to be careful with the balance of, yes, I can set up a plan for the waste treatment, but it means that I consume more energy and I produce more CO2 in the atmosphere. So again, we have to be careful with that.
Okay, and that seems to conclude the questions we have here in the box, and I'm very conscious we've overrun time, but I would like to ask my own question, if you don't mind, Yves. And that is, what is the process by which research and the information gained from research can contribute to decisions made by the Antarctic Treaty and by the CEP?
I would say that most of the discussion in the CEP are based on the science, on scientific results. I can give you for one example. At the moment, we have an increasing use of UAVs, drones or unmanned aerial vehicles in Antarctica, either for leisure or for scientific activities or monitoring or for logistics. And we have a lot of discussion about that. So what is the impact of this vehicle on the environment? Impact to the bird fauna, for example, when drones are flying close to the populations. Impact on the environment in case of crash of these devices in Antarctica with some fuel or batteries and so on, which can consider as a pollutant for the environment. So the discussion we have about that needs really the input of scientists. And for 2 or 3 years now, under the management of SCAR, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, scientists, and especially bird scientists, are encouraged to study the impact of drones, of UAVs, on bird population in terms of a change in their behavior, but also a change in their ecophysiology, recording the stress of this animal when a UAV is approaching. So we have now a lot of paper, we have several papers and more papers, which are peer-reviewed articles, and clearly it is now the base of the discussion of the CEP. And if the CEP and the ATCM produce some guidelines, for example, on how to use the UAVs in Antarctica in order to minimize the impact to the environment, these guidelines will be obviously produced on the basis of a peer-reviewed literature on this topic.
Good. I think that brings an end to all of the questions. And thank you very much, Yves, for spending longer on the line than we anticipated. I would just like to say thank you to APECS for allowing us to use their webinar system, and thank you to everybody who joined. We had around about 60 people at the peak there. And I'd like to remind you that next week on Thursday we have another webinar jointly with the European Polar Board and APECS, but this time we'll be heading north, and Timo Koivarova of the Arctic Centre at the University of Lapland will be giving a webinar on an introduction to the Arctic Council. So don't miss that. That'll be good. So nothing left to say, but thank you very much, Yves. Thank you very much for everybody for joining, and goodbye. Thanks.
Joe, just before closing, I would like me to thank all the participants and thank you to all for your interest in this issue and the governance of Antarctica. I hope that my talk will be useful for you. And if you need more info, don't hesitate to send me an email if necessary. I shall be pleased to answer to any question. So thank you to all, and bye-bye.
Yes, and just as a note, the webinar has been recorded and we will upload it onto the European Polar Board website, europeanpolarboard.org, and I think it will almost definitely end up on the APECS website as well. So you'll be able to revisit this and get all of this fantastic information that Yves has shared with us. So thank you very much, everybody, and thanks. Bye.